The morning sun struggled to pierce the thick dust clouds hovering over the rolling hills of Boeotia in the late summer of 479 BC. Thousands of men stood shoulder to shoulder, while the ground beneath them trembled from the rhythmic stomping of countless feet and the thunderous approach of cavalry. The air was thick with the metallic scent of bronze and the salty tang of sweat as the Spartan phalanx braced for impact. Arrows rained down from the sky like a deadly hailstorm, clattering against the raised shields of the Greek hoplites, who waited with disciplined silence. This was not merely a skirmish over borders or trade routes, but a desperate stand for survival against a superpower that had consumed nearly every civilization in its path. At stake was nothing less than the future of the Western world and the concept of freedom itself. If the Greek alliance crumbled on this dusty plain, the distinct cultures of Athens and Sparta would be extinguished under the heel of the Achaemenid Empire. The burgeoning experiment of democracy in Athens would be strangled in its cradle, and the martial excellence of Sparta would be reduced to a footnote in Persian history. The massive army assembled by the Persian general Mardonius was poised to finish what King Xerxes had started the previous year. Total subjugation was the only demand, and for the Greeks the only alternative to victory was slavery or annihilation. Standing at the center of this maelstrom was Pausanias, the regent of Sparta, and the commander of the largest Greek army ever assembled up to that point in history. He was a man bearing the immense weight of leadership over a fractious coalition of rival city-states that were prone to bickering even in the face of extinction. Pausanias was not a king but a guardian for his young cousin, yet he commanded the authority of the Spartan royal line. His eyes scanned the horizon where the Persian masses gathered, and his mind raced through strategies and contingencies. He knew that one wrong command or one moment of hesitation could spell the doom of his people. How did a collection of quarreling city-states manage to field such a unified force against the mightiest empire on earth? What possessed the Spartans to march north from the safety of the Peloponnese to fight in the open plains of Boeotia, where the Persian cavalry had the advantage? The answers lie in a complex web of diplomacy, betrayal, and strategic maneuvering that unfolded in the months leading up to this decisive encounter. The Battle of Plataea was the culmination of a long and bloody struggle, but the outcome was far from certain as the two armies stared each other down across the river Esopus. The result of that day would reshape the geopolitical landscape of the Mediterranean for centuries to come. It would mark the definitive end of the Persian invasions of Greece and signal the beginning of the golden age of classical civilization. When the dust finally settled, the myth of Persian invincibility would be shattered forever, and the Greeks would stand tall as the masters of their own destiny. But before the victory monuments could be raised, and the stories told, the men on the field of Plataea had to endure a grueling test of endurance and courage that pushed them to their absolute physical and mental limits. To understand the gravity of the situation at Plataea, we must look back to the previous autumn and the naval battle of Salamis. Although the Greek fleet had secured a stunning victory against the Persian navy, the war was far from over on land. King Xerxes had retreated to Asia, but he left behind his best general Mardonius, along with a massive hand-picked army to complete the conquest. Mardonius was a capable and ambitious commander who believed that the Greeks could still be defeated through a combination of military force and diplomatic bribery. He wintered his army in the fertile lands of Thessaly and waited for the spring campaigning season to begin. Mardonius knew that the Greek alliance was fragile and held together only by the immediate threat of destruction. He attempted to break the coalition by offering the Athenians a separate peace treaty that included autonomy and funds to rebuild their burned city. The Athenians rejected the offer with defiance, but they were also growing frustrated with the Spartans, who seemed content to remain behind their defensive wall at the Isthmus of Corinth. The Athenians sent urgent envoys to Sparta, demanding that their allies march north to face the Persian threat in Boeotia or risk losing Athens to the enemy. The government in Sparta hesitated for weeks, citing religious festivals and ongoing construction of the isthmus wall as reasons for delay. They were naturally cautious and reluctant to commit their precious hoplites to a campaign far from home. However, a shrewd advisor named Chilios of Tegea pointed out that the wall at the isthmus would be useless if the Athenian fleet defected to the Persians. Realizing that the fall of Athens would expose the Peloponnese to naval invasion, the Spartans finally acted. In a move of surprising speed and secrecy, Pausanias led 5,000 Spartan citizens and thousands of support troops out of the city under the cover of night. As the Spartan force marched north, they were joined by contingents from other Peloponnesian allies, swelling their ranks with each passing day. When they reached the isthmus and linked up with the Athenians, the combined Greek army numbered in the tens of thousands, making it the largest hoplite force ever mustered. Mardonius, hearing of the Greek advance, decided to abandon Attica, which was poor cavalry country, and withdrew to Boeotia. He chose his ground carefully near the town of Plataea, where the flat terrain would favor his superior cavalry, and where he had built a massive fortified camp. The Greeks followed Mardonius into Boeotia and took up positions on the lower slopes of Mount Cithaeron. This high ground offered them protection from the Persian horsemen and secured their supply lines back to the mountain passes. Below them on the plain and across the river Asopus lay the vast Persian encampment. The sheer scale of the enemy force was daunting, with soldiers drawn from every corner of the known world, including Medes, Bactrians, Indians, and even Greeks who had sided with the invader. The stage was set for a confrontation that had been building for decades. The initial phase of the confrontation was a tense stalemate characterized by minor skirmishes and logistical challenges. Mardonius was eager to draw the Greeks down onto the plain where his cavalry could flank and destroy them. Pausanias, however, refused to take the bait and kept his men on the rugged terrain of the foothills. To provoke the Greeks, Mardonius sent his cavalry commander Masistius to harass the Greek lines. The Persian horsemen rode up in waves, firing arrows and hurling insults, trying to goad the hoplites into breaking formation. During one of these cavalry raids, the Megarian contingent found themselves under heavy pressure and called for assistance. Pausanias dispatched a group of elite Athenian archers and heavy infantry to aid them. In the ensuing fight, a lucky arrow struck the horse of Masistius, causing the beast to rear and throw the Persian commander to the ground. The Greeks rushed forward and after a fierce struggle managed to kill Masistius, who was clad in golden scale armor under his tunic. The loss of such a high-ranking and popular officer was a severe blow to Persian morale. The death of Masistius provoked a furious reaction from the Persian cavalry, who charged en masse to recover his body. The Greeks held their ground and eventually drove the attackers back, securing the corpse of the fallen commander. They paraded the body of Masistius along their lines on a cart, cheering and mocking the enemy. This early success bolstered Greek confidence and proved that the dreaded Persian cavalry was not invincible. Encouraged by this victory, Pausanias decided to move his army closer to the enemy, taking up a position near the Gargaphia Spring. The new Greek position brought them down from the high slopes to a series of low ridges closer to the river Asopus. This move was intended to secure a better water supply at the Gargaphia Spring, as the Persian archers had been preventing them from accessing the river. The two armies now faced each other at close range, separated only by the riverbed. For over a week, neither side made a major move, as the seers and soothsayers on both sides reported unfavorable omens for an attack. It was a tense waiting game played under the scorching summer sun. While the armies waited, Mardonius grew increasingly impatient as his supplies began to dwindle and his army grew restless. He decided to use his cavalry to disrupt the Greek supply lines, which stretched back through the passes of Mount Cithaeron. Persian horsemen circled around the Greek flank under the cover of darkness and intercepted a supply convoy, capturing food and slaughtering the animals. This successful raid highlighted the vulnerability of the Greek position and put pressure on Pausanias to either fight or retreat. The situation for the Greeks deteriorated further when Mardonius ordered his cavalry to foul the Gargaphia Spring. The Persians rode up to the water source and choked it with soil and debris, rendering it unusable. With their main source of water destroyed and their supply convoys under attack, the Greek army faced a crisis of logistics. Thirst began to gnaw at the men, and the constant harassment from Persian archers and slingers was taking a toll on their nerves. Pausanias knew he could not maintain his position much longer. Under the cover of Knight Alexander I of Macedon, who was ostensibly fighting for the Persians, but secretly favored the Greek cause, rode to the Athenian camp. He warned the Athenian generals that Mardonius had decided to attack the following day regardless of the omens. This vital intelligence was relayed to Pausanias, who held a council of war with his generals. They formulated a plan to withdraw the army back toward the foothills of Cithaeron to a location known as the Island, where they would have access to fresh water and protection from cavalry. The withdrawal was scheduled to take place that very night, but executing a retreat in the face of the enemy is one of the most difficult military maneuvers. Confusion reigned as the various Greek contingents attempted to move in the darkness. Some units got lost and retreated all the way back to the town of Plataea, while others failed to move at all. The Spartan center was delayed by a stubborn officer named Amampharatus, who refused to retreat, claiming that it was shameful for a Spartan to turn his back on the enemy. Pausanias spent precious hours arguing with Amampharatus, trying to convince him that the movement was a tactical redeployment rather than a retreat. By the time the dispute was resolved, the sky was beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. The Spartans and Tegeans finally began to move, but they were separated from the Athenians, who were marching by a different route. The Greek army was now fragmented and vulnerable, strung out across the hills in the growing light of morning. When the sun rose, Mardonius looked out from his camp and saw the Greeks retreating. Believing that his enemy was fleeing in panic, he ordered his army to pursue. The Persians crossed the river Asopus in a disorganized rush, eager to run down the retreating Spartans. Mardonius led the way on his white horse, surrounded by his elite guard, confident that victory was within his grasp. He did not realize that he was leading his men into a deadly trap against the most disciplined infantry in the world. The Persians caught up with the Spartan and Tegean rear guard on the slopes near the temple of Demeter. Pausanias, seeing the enemy approaching, halted his retreat and ordered his men to form the Phalanx. However, the omens were still unfavorable, and the Spartan tradition forbade them from fighting until the gods signaled their approval. The Spartans stood motionless behind their shields, while Persian arrows rained down upon them, causing many casualties. It was a supreme test of discipline, as men fell without striking a blow in return. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the sacrifices proved favorable. Pausanias gave the order to charge, and the Spartan phalanx surged forward like a coiled spring released. The Tegeans had already rushed ahead, engaging the enemy with fury. The collision between the heavy Greek hoplites and the lighter Persian infantry was brutal and decisive. The Persians fought bravely, grappling with the Greek spears and trying to break the shield wall, but they were outmatched in armor and weaponry. The battle raged fiercely on the hillside, with the Persians piling up against the impenetrable wall of bronze shields. Mardonius fought in the front lines, exhibiting great personal courage, but his presence made him a prime target. A Spartan soldier named Eumnestus spotted the Persian general and hurled a rock that struck Mardonius in the head, killing him instantly. The death of their commander sent a shockwave through the Persian ranks, and their resistance began to crumble. With Mardonius dead and the Spartan pressure unrelenting, the Persian formation broke. Panic spread like wildfire, and the survivors turned and fled back toward their fortified camp across the river. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, the Athenians were engaged in a bitter struggle against the Thebans, who had sided with the Persians. The fight between the two Greek city-states was intense and bloody, fueled by long-standing hatreds. Eventually, the Athenians prevailed, driving the Thebans from the field. The various Greek contingents now converged on the Persian stockade, where the remnants of the invading army had taken refuge. The wooden walls of the camp initially held off the Spartan assault, as they were not trained in siege warfare. However, when the Athenians arrived with their expertise in storming fortifications, the Greeks breached the defenses. What followed was a massacre, as the pent-up rage of the Greeks was unleashed upon the trapped enemy. The slaughter within the Persian camp was horrific, with thousands of invaders cut down where they stood. The Greek historians claim that out of the vast army, Mardonius had commanded, only a small fraction escaped alive. The victory was total and absolute. The threat that had hung over Greece for so long was finally extinguished in the dust and blood of the Persian camp. The Greeks stood amidst the carnage, exhausted but triumphant, having achieved the impossible against overwhelming odds. As the adrenaline faded, the Greeks began to take stock of the immense spoils of war. The Persian camp was filled with treasures beyond their wildest dreams, including tents woven with gold and silver, bowls of precious metals, and finely crafted weapons. Pausanias entered the magnificent tent of Mardonius, which had been left by Xerxes, and marveled at the luxury. He ordered his cooks to prepare a Spartan black broth meal and set it beside the Persian feast to demonstrate the folly of the invaders who had traveled so far to rob the Greeks of their poverty. The victory at Plataea was not just a military triumph, but a validation of the Greek way of life. It proved that free men fighting for their homes and laws were superior to subjects driven by the lash of a tyrant. To commemorate the victory, the Greeks dedicated a portion of the spoils to the gods. They melted down Persian weapons to create a golden tripod supported by a bronze column of 3 intertwined snakes, which was placed at Delphi. This serpent column, inscribed with the names of the city-states that fought, still exists today in Istanbul. The Battle of Plataea marked the final time a Persian army would ever invade mainland Greece. It secured the independence of the Greek city-states and allowed for the flowering of culture, philosophy, and art that would define the classical age. The cooperation between Sparta and Athens, although brief and born of necessity, had saved Western civilization from being absorbed into the East. The legacy of those who fought and died at Plataea resonates through history as a testament to the power of unity and the enduring human desire for freedom. In the aftermath, the Greeks punished the leaders of Thebes, who had collaborated with the enemy, executing them without trial. The alliance then turned its attention to liberating the Ionian Greeks in Asia Minor, taking the offensive against the retreating Persian Empire. The balance of power had shifted permanently. The great king of Persia was forced to look inward, dealing with rebellions and internal strife, while Greece entered an era of unprecedented confidence and expansion. Pausanias, the architect of the victory, would later fall from grace, accused of conspiring with the Persians and adopting their customs. His tragic end serves as a reminder that the heroes of history are often flawed and complex figures. Yet on that hot summer day in Boeotia, he stood as the shield of Greece, holding the line against the darkness. His leadership and the iron discipline of the Spartan warriors he commanded ensured that the flame of Greek liberty would not be extinguished. The plain of Plataea, once covered in dust and blood, eventually returned to being quiet farmland. But the memory of what transpired there was etched into the consciousness of the Greek people. They established a festival, the Eleutheria, or Feast of Freedom, to honor the fallen and swore oaths to defend their land against tyranny. The burial mounds of the Spartans, Athenians, and other allies remained visible for centuries, standing as silent sentinels over the battlefield. Today, the Battle of Plataea is often overshadowed by the more famous engagements at Marathon and Thermopylae. However, it was Plataea that truly decided the war. Marathon showed that the Persians could be beaten, and Thermopylae showed that the Greeks would die for their freedom, but Plataea ensured that they would live in it. It was the strategic masterpiece that delivered the final knockout blow to the imperial ambitions of Persia in Europe. As we reflect on this pivotal moment in history, we are reminded that the course of civilization often hangs by a thread. The courage of the men who stood in the Phalanx at Plataea preserved the seeds of democracy, science, and philosophy that would eventually grow into the foundations of the modern Western world. Their sacrifice secured a future where individuals could be citizens rather than subjects, and where reason could challenge authority. The whisper of time carries the echoes of their clash across the millennia. It tells the story of how a small, fractured collection of city-states defied the greatest empire the world had ever seen. The Battle of Plataea remains a powerful symbol of resistance and the enduring spirit of independence. It stands as a monument to the day when the Greeks stood shoulder to shoulder and forged their destiny in bronze and blood.